Welcome to Sunday Interview with me, Grevazio Zulu. The privatization program, which saw over 270 state-owned enterprises disposed of, happened over 25 years ago, but has remained as divisive and contentious as it was at the time it was being undertaken. It is a story that has refused to die and is haunting those that took part in the process. The debate is back in the public domain with former Finance Minister Edith Nawakwi at the center stage. Well, Ms. Nawakwi is here with me in the studio today, and she addresses that and many other national issues. Ms. Nawakwi has served in various government portfolios that include labor, agriculture, and energy. She is also the current leader of the Forum for Democracy and Development, FDD. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Zulu. Good evening. Good evening, viewers. My heart goes out to all our brothers and sisters who are bedridden in various health facilities around the country, and to all the brothers and sisters who are fallen at the pandemic. We really need to understand that this pandemic is a devastating pandemic, and we shouldn't drop our guard. My brothers and sisters, my daughters, my children, please let us observe the instructions from the Ministry of Health and the National Institute of Public Health. Let us look after each other, let us stay at home, let us mask, and please, please, if you can afford it, please stay at home. I know it's difficult because a number of us find ourselves trying to make a living at the margin, in the markets, on the street. So it's very difficult to say to every citizen, please stay at home, because we have to fend for our livelihood. And that is understood. But as you are in the public arena, please wear a mask.
What role can you play as politicians in trying to ensure that people abide by the regulations of masking up, social distancing, staying home? As I've just said, not everyone can stay at home. It's not possible. When you have to wake up, go to the market to order vegetables, get on a minibus, and stay at the market up to 21, 22 hours. The best that can be done, and the role that we can play as politicians, is to support our communities to wear masks, to wash their hands, and to observe general hygiene around the surroundings where people are working. That's what can be done. But you cannot enforce draconian moves that you can stop people, frisk them, and we have to take an approach to persuade them, to make them see the dark side of this pandemic, that is devastating, and it's something that we don't know when it will end. Now, getting back to our program today, you've been in politics, a politician, maybe for 30 years now. So what keeps you going? That's 30 is a long, long time.
Well, I mean, I'm still alive. I'm not young anymore. I've become a bit wiser. What keeps me on is that the political arena still needs opposite views, and still needs views of reason, a moderating influence. If you look at our political landscape in the country, there are very, very few women. Other than the ministers and the councillors, there are very few politicians on the political arena. And I look forward to a day when we shall have another female rising up to a level where they can be prospective presidential leaders in this country. So that's what keeps me on. I look around and say, if I give up today, who is coming in my footsteps? Otherwise, at 60, I'm reaching the retirement age, the statutory retirement age for every Zambian is 65. So it's very few years left. I mean,
For politicians, it's probably many years left.
Well, I mean, you become very slow.
Above 70.
Yeah, you become slow. You don't have the same energy to get on a bus and go to Namshakende, or stay up until 0:04 a.m. having meetings. So, but age comes with its own challenges. A bit wiser, but you agree with me that we really need young people to take up the mantle of leadership. I hear a lot of people complain that we, the older politicians, don't serve their interests. And I say to our young people, please take up leadership. If you can go back to our earlier times, there were people like Venon Mwanga. He was MP and leader at 18. So it's possible the statutory age for being a leader in this country is 18. You can be MP, you can be president at 35. So we really need a young cadre of politicians to come forward with new ideas.
Now, I was going to ask you, you mentioned something about having to see another woman rise. For a long, long time, I think, apart from Gwendolyn Coney, maybe, you've been the only female name on the ballot, presidential ballot. How have you managed? Why do you think there's so many, the fewer women trying to take up decision-making positions, particularly in politics? What is stopping them?
Well, we had my elder sister, Dr. Mbikusita Lewanika, and my late sister, Gwendolyn Coney. These were viable names for leadership in this country. We still have this problem in our country where if a woman stands up for what they believe in, I think you've seen what has happened this week. Everybody rushes to below the belt. I mean, our men in this country are not used to discussing issues above the belt. Whenever you defeat them in a logical argument, the only thing they can think of is pulling you down. As someone said from Kenya, that you know, you want to discuss ideas using your brains, but our men in this country are so petty. They think that the little gods of reason, whenever you defeat them in an argument, they call you angry, irrational, harboring a garage. Then they tell you that no, your marriage is not in order, as if their marriages are in order. They characterize you as a female figure who shouldn't be looked up to. But for me, for that, I see it as a failure of them not being to match up to people like me who are intellectually gifted. So that's what keeps me on. When someone attacks me like the way Gary Nkombo and Hakainde attacked me, I was on air at Hot FM. I never mentioned the name of my sister, Mrs. Hakainde Mutinta. I never, because she's not in the arena. But from nowhere, they were drawing my husband into the fray. And he's not a politician.
So you think women fear this aggressive and dirty way of politicking?
No mother wants to be in the arena and be told, like this little boy has said, that I'm a prostitute. I'm not a prostitute. I'm a respectable mother.
The public doesn't know. Which little boy is
this? Is Tukuta Chela. You check his post, what he's doing. And this is an attempt to support a male candidate. But they should engage me on a political platform. They should engage me on a fact. If you see the number of men who have come to the defense of my opponent, you just sit back and bemuse yourself and say, doesn't he have a mouth? Some of them who've been calling me directly to abuse me, I ask them, hey, comrade, doesn't this gentleman have a mouth? He can defend himself. Equally, I can defend myself. He started the story that I was slumbering and some other people were slumbering. I was responding to that. And I asked very, very pertinent questions. At what level did he become a shareholder of Southern Sun and take up the leadership? It's a simple, straightforward, intellectual question.
You're taking us to the issue of privatization. I know you opened the Pandora's box when you raised all those, what you're calling pertinent questions. Maybe we could start from the start.
I didn't open the Pandora's box. I think you agree with me, Mr. Zulu, that for quite a while now, you haven't seen me in the media, you haven't seen me comment on anything, economic, social, or political. I was just sitting for almost 7 days. There was a clip which went viral from my brother Hakainde Hichilema, in which he was basically accusing me of having been asleep when he was in charge of privatization.
I know we have that clip. Maybe we could play it and hear for ourselves what you are reacting to. I think is that okay?
Yes, because there's an impression that I'm the one who just walked to the press and started attacking Mr. Hakainde. No, I wouldn't do that.
Let's listen to
He
the clip.
started.
Let's listen to the clip.
The people who saw the mine were the MMD government. They are there, they're still alive. Mr. Chikwande is alive. Edith Nawakwi is alive. They are all there. Me, I was 29, 30 years old. I've said this before. Number, Mwachewa 29, 30 years old, Arishama Mine, which belongs to the government. Mwari Shipula. Mwari Shipula.
I think Justified is asking a very valid question. You are alive. Alexander Chikwande is alive, and many others
Yes,
are alive.
but
So
I was not the only minister. I think that Grevazio, you need to understand that I served for 11 months, from 1997 to 1998. And that's a period that I'm accountable to as far as privatization is concerned. Why didn't he mention my brother, Dr. Katere Kalumba? Why didn't he mention Dr. Magande? All these are ministers who come after me. Why pick on me alone? He should have mentioned. In fact,
so I mean, you were at the center of it. So his question is more in asking.
Mr. Chikwanda was not even a minister of finance. Mr. Chikwanda was the advisor to the presidency. So he should have mentioned all the ministers if he chose to mention one. The video went viral and people were calling me and I got a lot of accusations online, and because of one phone line, everyone has it. So I get inundated with that. I don't have 10 phones, I just have one phone line.
So he's
and
I
felt that I had a duty to respond, and I was responding on the number of activities that I was personally responsible. And that's why I say that I was responsible for Lima Bank. I was responsible for signing off a project which had been advertised prior to my being minister. That was the Intercontinental Hotel in Livingstone. And those were the two projects that I wanted to answer to in relation to Mr. Hakainde, because I dealt with him across the table on those. In fact, on Lima Bank, it was his colleagues. But I was surprised that at the end of it, then I'm told that 14/3A Several Road becomes his property. Now, he told us that this was...
Did you lie on
No,
radio?
I didn't. I think he...
Because he called you, he told you he didn't buy that from Lima. That wasn't Lima.
Tell me, these young people were responsible for certain portfolios. So if he's dealing with Lima Bank, another colleague of his, because you see, who runs Britain, the book says, is friends from Oxford. And they sit at a kitchen table, and they would be able to know which one in their group has which projects. And at the time, he was responsible for his firm was responsible for receivership, which was turned into a liquidation of Lima Bank. At that specific time, you cannot tell me that you are chairman of one group, but I bought it from there. You have the power there in the system. And therefore, for me, whether it's the Tobacco Board of Zambia or Lima Bank, is neither here nor there. And the question
suppose he shows you the bid documents and valid papers that he bid for that house.
Who put the Tobacco Board of Zambia under receivership during that time? Who put it under receivership? So, I mean, I'm lost. There's been a lot said. And as far as the Southern Sun is concerned, I asked the pertinent questions. When the bids were opened, they opened them. ZPS sit as a board, they decide, come to the ministry and say, this is the package which we are giving the ministry. I took the deliberate step to call Hakainde aside and say to him, Musa, is this the best bid? Why didn't you take the one for 26 million? The value is 26 million. Why didn't you take the one for 20 million? Why didn't you take the one for 9.5 million? There were a number of offers there. His answer was very specific, and even a dull person could have understood it. You are talking to me, I take you for what you are giving me, I look at the facts you provided for me, and they were plausible. His argument was that, Minister, These other people, they just want the keys for Intercontinental Hotel. They walk in there and clean it up, change the carpets, change the pots, and start operating it as is. However, this bid which I'm giving to you, lower as it is, it's a best bid. We are going to get 250 rooms. And there is a consequential investment of $50 million. Now, at the time, the economy of Livingstone was dead. If you sell Intercontinental and someone takes the keys and walks in and he cleans the pots and starts to run it as Intercontinental, who would you rather take? You take the one who is going to create some employment, to build 250 rooms, to bring in 50 million, finish it. And in fact, there were stories that they were even going to get sand from across. I stopped it. I put another rider. I said, please, colleagues, when these people come in, the way the project has been structured, they want to put a fence up to the water. I instructed them that please go back and negotiate that 50 meters from the waters is public property. Because my relatives, when they're coming out of the Zambezi, they're being chased by crocodiles. Where are they going to run if you put a fence? That was also a sticking issue. And we were going to and fro. And finally, we agreed that they go ahead. The third issue I put across, I said, colleagues, I want you to create a trust for the people around Livingstone. Create a trust. I never said that these shares be put in individual names. Now, as a politician and as a minister, we were working in conjunction with the World Bank, and the instructions between us were very clear that politicians should not be meddled in negotiations. The ZPA will get the bids, they put teams to negotiate in place, then the board agrees, and we brief cabinet on that. These are the offers. My job is to go to cabinet and say, this is what has happened, and therefore they will say, go ahead and sign. Now, to find that the chairperson of the negotiations becomes also the shareholder is what has brought us to this stage. He hasn't been open enough to say that some of the shareholders in the transaction were residing at plot 14 stroke whatever 3A Sevo Road, and who was residing there? It's himself.
So why are we raising this issue now?
No, because
he's asked a question, a valid one. Where were you when all these things were happening? You were in
I think I've explained. I even called him aside. He told me that this was the best bid.
Couldn't you have raised the flag after you realized that your chairperson for the negotiating team was sitting now on the board?
This comes to light after we have departed. I think you know that in 1998, I leave, I go to Labour. 2000, we are out campaigning against the third term. These structures are getting in place. I think a lot of people have raised the issues as to how we became chairperson of Southern Sun. This has been circulating in the public domain, but Mr. Nkombo says that he was very smart. He was identified as a smart person, and maybe that's why he calls us sleeping, because we didn't know that he was going to take a share from that side, and I think that that's the issue. So the
ZPPA board at that point was sleeping, to borrow his words.
I don't know what transpired that side, because we were not privy to going in their board meetings and all that. Those are issues that he himself can answer, because he has said we are sleeping. So if I continue to justify this, I will continue to justify my slumber. But it's only himself who can answer and say, look, I took a share because of this. Maybe how do you do it? How do you do it? And normally in Zambia, we think that politicians are the most endemically corrupt people. But I think that governance should extend to the private sector. When the World Bank came to Africa to do this privatization program, they came with a notion that if ministers were responsible for these facilities, then they will bequeath the wealth to themselves. And therefore, we agreed. And it was, I think, a noble thing.
A logical explanation.
Yes, to say that get the consultants, the accountants. I mean, if you take a the Grand Tonton, for example, they had a cadre of qualified accountants.
So the decision to use consultants and independent negotiating teams was not coming from government.
It was
coming from the World Bank.
It was a joint agreement between the government and the World Bank and the IMF, and some of these programs were even funded by the World Bank. Because you know that in the 90s the government had no money. So if you look at the structure of privatization on the continent, it was the same model. And I think going into the next century, we need to understand that the interest of the nation can only be presented by those who are custodians of public policy, because the private sector serves the private interest.
So what was your role in this privatization process?
I said I was minister.
Just probably endorsing the decisions by the team and ZP.
Mr. Zulu, you simplify it like that. Did you ever see any one minister who sat in a negotiating room? Have you ever heard that either myself, late Penza, or late Kasonde, or currently Dr. Katere Kalumba, or even the current minister, do you ever hear that they are in a negotiating room with the external funders or what? Unless it's bilateral agreements with countries for borrowing money, but even that, the technicians sit, package, and you peruse through it. And I said I raised the pertinent issues. I raised the issue as to why we had gone for a lower bidder than those that were on a higher side. And the answer from Hakainde was very clear. And I think I gave him the benefit of doubt, because that's what he said. These are the facts. The others are not giving us this kind of investment. Now, would you now say in 2020 that we should have gone for a lower bidder, give them the keys, they just clean up Intercontinental and change the curtains and walk in?
So do you agree, do you agree with him in some way that the sale was good?
The sale was the price was low, but the investment attached to it is what convinced the government that we were on a correct path. What has soured this discussion is to find that the chairperson who was advising government seems to have had an interest. That's basically the issue at hand. And it's
an interest he didn't declare.
It's an interest he didn't
could have followed up.
Well, if he declared interest, then ZPA would have put another negotiator there. You see that?
You called out his name again on Ramcos. What do you think was his role in there?
Well,
were you just politicking?
No, I was not.
Trying to throw mud at a presidential candidate?
No. And I think that's what I seem to take issue to. He was the first one, and they are the ones who are perpetually saying, as if Edith Nawakwi was the only minister. The bigger contracts were signed off by my colleagues because of my short stay at the ministry. You need to understand, Mr. Zulu, that at the time I went to the ministry, donors had taken off for almost 2 years. And those who were queuing up to buy the mines had also taken off. There were no negotiations. There were no bilateral arrangements for 2 years because of the issues of governance that arose. People forget that. I went around in 2 to 3 months and brought the donors to the table. We started negotiating the Paris Club agreements for debt write-off, and that was a major preoccupation as to how we are going to get rid of the $7 billion. Then we brought the donors back to the table to start renegotiating, engaging us in terms of sale of the packages of mining assets. I hope that is very clear. So when you say, what was your role? I brought the donors back to the table. I brought the whole system back to life, which had been in abeyance for 2 years for certain governance issues which were non-economic.
I want you to address the issue of Ramcos.
Now, I was saying that because you are saying, were you just sitting? So Ramcos is Rwansha mine. Ramcos is Rwansha mine. Now, Rwansha mine was supposed to be put under receivership. And the government chose Grand Tonton to be the receivers. And if you remember, there were a lot of accusations because money was put at the table to be able to pay the workers and those suppliers who were going to run on the mine, because government's position was that it was better to save the asset and find new investors than get the creditors to run on it. So they put money on the table for the receiver to be able to clear the assets. And issues arise out of that as to how was that money used. I think these are the things which even my late president was being questioned to, and himself said, look, you people, you continue to ask me as to where the money went. My neighbor, who was Hakainde Hichilema, must be able to give you a full account because they were the accountants. So normally, it's usually the politicians who are roasted. But the point I'm making is that for all the assets that were being privatized, there were negotiating teams which were hired. You correctly said over 200 assets were up for privatization, and some were by local teams, some were liquidated, some were restructured, some were saved from a complete destruction. And I always try to remind people that they could remember the August of 1998 when the Anglo-American walked to the Ministry of Finance and wanted to put the entire mining sector on the Copper Belt under liquidation. And I stood up. My colleague says he was very young, but he forgets that he's only 2 years younger than me. I was about his age, and I stood up to Anglo-American. You have never heard that FDD is being funded by any one of these people that we dealt with. You've never heard that. But you see...
But the question that people are asking is that, is it okay for government to sit back and ask a consultant to account for how money was spent in the receivership?
No, I think that that's not what government is asking. Government did not sit back. I think that those issues were dealt with, but when someone stands on a pedestal of I'm Mr. Clean, sure, people are entitled to ask. For example, I find it strange that the chairperson of selling of Southern Sun, Intercontinental Hotel, also becomes the shareholder and the chairperson. And the answer from my colleague's side is that it's because he's smart. So all of us are stupid. He didn't declare anywhere. So you cannot be, even in accounting terms, firms of accountants, they take about 10 years before you can take either directorship or anything on a firm that you've been auditing. So these are some of these issues which, because some people say they are very rich, people ask. People ask.
Wasn't he paid for the work he did?
Look, all the work that he...
Good enough money to give him a good start?
Well, that's it. I can't answer for him. I think you need to call him to Sunday interview and ask him those questions. Every committee that was advising government on transaction was paid for either directly from money from ZPA, which was alienated from the Treasury, or money which was organized by the Treasury through World Bank facilities to do these jobs.
I asked you that question because you've asked about his wealth.
I'm not the one who is asking about his wealth. I think the people have been asking about his wealth. And out of that question, he should have just said, I worked for government. This is how much I was paid. And this is how I have invested it. It's a simple, normal question. There was no need for him to bring us into play and say, look, whatever happened with mining, it is Edith Nawakwi. I think that was extremely unfair, and I don't think that he needed to answer that way. As a politician, he needs to be a bit tempered in his answers and not get angry when people ask questions. Even Donald Trump, the president of the United States, being asked, he answers in the same way. It's my private life. He could have answered, look, I'm not interested in answering that question, than push it to other people who are not answering the question.
Maybe I should ask you this question. In 2006, you went into an alliance with the person today you are accusing of not impropriety, maybe. I don't know what word I could use, not a proper one, of amassing wealth. Which, didn't you see this when you were
No,
when you were going
I think there was
didn't you see the need to ask him the questions then?
No, I think that you also need to know the history of how he comes in. He comes into the alliance 45 days before the general election, following the demise of our colleague Anderson Mazoka. And some of his MPs, specifically Garin Kombo, says that I was bitter because I didn't become the heir apparent to the throne of being president of UDA. I mean, he came from the private sector. As I have said, from 2001, these issues begin to arise when he gets into the politics. People, he says he's a rich man, he's declaring big assets and bank accounts in England, in offshore accounts, and people say, when did he become rich? He's the one who started this. So, Garin Kombo says I was bitter because I was not the leader of UDA. I want the nation to know that Hakainde Hichilema, I called him to my house after many days of acrimony going to and fro. I called him to my house and said to him, let's go and announce that you are going to be the leader of UDA. In effect, I made him leader of UDA in our house. If he's honest enough, he would remember that day when I phoned him and said, please come to Rome. And when he came, because we had a stalemate, I said, listen, let's go and announce. And we went to UNIPSI headquarters where we met in Shek Road, and we announced that he was going to be a leader. So if I was bitter, I could have just said, listen, Twala Firila Munsenga, there's no going to be president. You go and stand as UPND, and I'll stand as FDD, and TDNG will stand as UNIP. But I was magnanimous enough as a mother to say, okay, let me not sit on the interests of the Zambian people. If he can get us there, let's give him the mantle. And I did. I actually gave in and gave him.
You didn't see the need to question him then?
I mean, we sat down at some place, and the three of us, TJ, myself, and himself, and we asked each other questions. And the questions were very simple. What are the impediments that you have, which you think will come out in the campaign? And we talked about our strength. We talked about our weaknesses. For him, he says, look, I have no impediments. So you take a person as they say. You can start plodding and going to anti-corruption and digging in. You are colleagues. You sit there, you trust each other. And the trust is not something you can just throw out of the window because you have personal issues. No.
Now, away from
and for me, he said to me in that meeting that my weakness was that I'm a woman and that I'm not properly married. And he said quite a number of things. But you see, when now, so many years later, he still continues to say, oh, she's my mulam. I know. When they continue to talk about the sexism that they shoulder on themselves, I know that's how they are. So it doesn't hurt me. It doesn't push me backwards. I just laugh and move on.
Maybe away from Mr. Hichilema, away from everything else, on an objective perspective, would you say the privatization exercise was not undertaken properly?
I mean,
were Zambians swindled, not by any individual, but were Zambians misled in this whole process?
Listen, people want to say that, but people forget the backdrop of where we were. In 1990, those of us who were alive will remember vividly the queues, the shortages on the street, the fact that the workers on the copper belt could go for 2 to 3 months without pay because the mining industry was on its knees. The copper prices were $2,000 per ton. The indebtedness of Zambia was at its peak, 7 billion at that time. And you couldn't go to any creditor, bilateral, commercial, to even borrow money. And therefore, we agreed as a cabinet that the best way was to go back to the IMF. Part of the packages that the International Monetary Fund was doing to be able to offer relief, balance of payment support, was for Zambia to work with the World Bank so that the World Bank could give the country money for social services, such as education, health. But they would not do that because the argument was that if they give us $20 million for use and the creditors see that money in the pot, the creditors will then have a run. It means that we are giving you money, which money you will use to pay your creditors. And some of the creditors were commercial creditors, they were not bilateral creditors. So the scheme was created where let us restructure our economy. That's why it was called the structural adjustment. And structural adjustment came with its casualties. The casualties were you as a government have to get rid of business. Government was at the time 100% shareholder, except for the mines where we were in partnership with mostly with the Anglo-American. So they said you have to restructure the economy. And restructuring meant getting rid of almost all our core assets. In a situation where you are broke, even as an individual, if you are bankrupt, you are selling, it is the buyer's market. So basically you went to across to Phelps Dodge, to Noranda, to where, and what they were demanding was, look, you give us these assets, we'll put this investment. A clear model of what I've explained about the Livingstone Hotel, where despite the low price, there would be consequential investment. You go to Konkola Deep, for example, you needed maybe $10 billion at the time. They're saying, no, but the price of copper is 2,000. So if you want us to get the mines, this is the price. You get your income in due process as we invest. So when you say you gave them for nothing, look at the environment at the time. What we should have done, which I personally was advocating all the time, was that we needed to have retained a share. And we had many interactions during my time with the World Bank that look at Chile's model. Chile's model, and if you go to the record, I'm on record as saying, look at Chile's model. Chile's model is that government takes a shareholding and the private sector takes a shareholding. But they said, no, you have to get rid of all your shares. And that's how we achieved the structural adjustment. We then were told, okay, tighten your belts, good times are coming. And you saw that the good times started to come, where the debt was written off. We started to do quite well. And I think that you agree with me that by the time the PF comes in, there were positive reserves at the Treasury. So I think that we moved from extreme debt to a position where we could start to grow. As to whether this model was correct, the question is, where was agriculture? Where was education? Where are these other sectors? I remember if you go to the Ministry of Finance, you'll find a letter which I authored to then Director Denning at the World Bank. And I said to them, listen, you've come with this structural adjustment program, and you are focusing on individual sectors. Let's take Livingstone, I wrote in the letter. If we have 250 tourists arriving on a daily basis, where is the airport? And these tourists will be sick, they will need police officers and all that. We need to have a holistic approach. I also wrote and said we needed to invest in the energy sector. That's how you saw that even in Lusaka here, we had symposiums where we started to raise money to invest in the electricity sector. Because if you've given out the mines which were under 25% capacity utilization, by the time you get the Mopanis, now we have the northwestern province, the demand for power was going to be phenomenal, which has come to pass. And I wish people could put those letters which I was writing to the World Bank, pleading with them, pleading with them that we needed to have investment in roads and the energy, because they would come with a program and say, this is ASIP, this is the structural adjustment. Just, you know,
and these were in silos, they were not speaking to each other.
I said we needed to have a holistic approach. And when I went to the World Bank, I discussed with the president then, and they said, Madam Nawakwi, we hear you. Because at the time, Zambia was taken off the table. Madam, we hear you. We are going to come back to Zambia, we have told you. And that's how they came back to the table. So when people keep on saying, what's your role? What's your role? I mean, I didn't.
That's your role. You've explained it.
Yes.
Now let's look at the economy. Move away from privatization. Look at maybe specifically at a few issues that have happened in the recent past. We have a new Bank of Zambia governor subject to ratification. And upon his appointment, there was too much talk about the dismissal of Dr. Kalyalia and the appointment of Mr. Mvunga. Some of these concerns coming across the borders, of particular note Tito Mbeweni, South African Finance Minister.
I think that as Zambians, we give too much credence to foreigners. I don't know, even as the former Minister of Finance, I worked with Trevor Manuel in those 11 months that I was at the ministry. And I don't know if you can actually...
You've been Tito Mbeweni?
No, I worked with Trevor Manuel. But I don't know if the stage of Trevor Manuel in that time could comment on the activities in Zambia. What we did in the region would be that as ministers, when we go to the International Monetary Fund, if Zambia raises an issue, the others say what is happening in Zambia has an impact in the region. Because Zambia is like the pulsating heart of Africa. We have 8 neighbors here. If things go wrong in Zambia, everybody gets affected. Now, the comment from the Minister of Finance should probably have just been a phone call to his colleague minister and they talk as just a tea discussion. But to go in public podium and say what he said, I think is out of diplomatic etiquette and out of the SADC mode of operation. Because in SADC, there is this camaraderie and supporting each other. But you cannot castigate a head of state. I cannot here say whatever I think about South Africa, say that President Ramaphosa said this. But I think that you also need to give credence to what the President of South Africa said. He said that's not his position. Look, these are professionals, they know each other, so I think you leave it at that. The President of the Republic of Zambia appoints who he wants at his pleasure. Everyone who is appointed by the President serves at their pleasure. And at a certain time, these jobs end. Whether you stay there for 20 years, these jobs end. I know Dr. Kalyalia personally. I know his professional acumen. Maybe people don't understand that while he has served in the West, he has come back to serve here. He's also a farmer. And he has his professionalism, which he can serve the country in other capacities. It's not like the Bank of Zambia job was a job in perpetuity. That's why it was an appointment. Now, the appointment of Mr. Mvunga is purely at the pleasure of the President. As a former Minister of Finance, I think that I cannot say, no, Mr. President should appoint that. I was not consulted, so why would I comment on a matter which I'm not consulted? It's even an unfair question to ask me as a leader of a political party, because as a president, when I'm president, I would like people to serve at the pleasure of the presidents and relieve them and thank them when I think time is due. Time is due. Yes, because what do you think the new governor should focus on maybe moving forward? Okay, that's a better question. The new governor should focus on the fact that we cannot develop Zambia by running a monetary policy which only looks at the money side. We need monetary policy that goes in tandem with our fiscal policy. What are our aspirations in this country? We have been taught by this pandemic that depending on the outside, it will not save us. I think you agree with me that at this point in time, we need to take a step back and say, has the monetary policy which we've pursued for the past 30 years saved us? That's why in the West, at this time, they are having very, very low interest rates to stimulate borrowing. But if you go in our markets, interest rates are extremely high. And we need monetary policy which spurs development. There is no one who is going to borrow money at 30% in this kind of economy. We needed money to stimulate investment. And there was an attempt by the president to release some liquidity into the market. I think you heard about 10 billion. But the question that must be asked is, has this money gone to where it was needed? And where was it needed? It was to support productivity. But what the central bank, I don't know whether it is with the support of the ministry, has done is that they've taken this money and cushioned the commercial banks. If, Mr. Zulu, you borrowed 10 kwacha from a commercial bank and your interest was 30%, what they have done with this money is that the commercial bank goes to the central bank, collects that 10 kwacha, and comes back to you, Mr. Zulu, and says, well, I've collected 10 kwacha from the central bank. Thank you very much. So now the 10 kwacha which you owe me, I'm going to give you a further 5 years for you to repay me, and I've reduced the interest. So basically that money went to cover the financial position of commercial banks. It didn't go to support the importation of casings, importation of inputs. It didn't go to that. It went to existing clients' accounts held with the central bank. So the banks then did not have to start providing for that. So it was basically to support provisions for the commercial banks. And I don't think that that is a correct approach. Now, what is the way forward before you say time is up? One, I think there's absolutely no solution other than all of us to sit at the table and say what is our future. And our future cannot be determined by the open markets. Our future has to be determined by how we manage agriculture. When I sit and wake up, I say, it's like a nightmare. I say, we are safe because we can eat. And we should do everything within our power to make sure that our people, when they wake up, they have food. In the worst thing that will ever happen to our country in this kind of environment is to wake up and go to the 1990s when we had to import maize. Now we have to do everything possible. And I'm pleased that I see a lot of effort to get the farmers to produce. Now, there are a lot of food security packs which are being given out. We need to understand that in the northern sector, that is northwestern, northern, Muchinga, eastern province, these provinces have to be positioned to plan for our 11th province, which is Lubumbashi. As we sit here, our brothers and sisters from the DRC are in our villages in the northern sector, buying beans, buying maize, buying any grain that they can find. So we shouldn't look at them and say, this is smuggling. We should say, how do we turn this into our opportunity,
into an opportunity
so that we can raise money to be able to manage our monetary sector. And if there are 11, 12 million Congolese in the Lubumbashi area, sure, that's a huge market. Now, what else should we do? We should plan so that when a farmer has food, they have enough to eat and they have enough to sell, because they also need cash security. Besides food security, we need cash security. So I would like to see an arrangement where we actually move it beyond subsistence support.
Do you think you need to remodel the culture among Zambians, other than depending on government too much?
I think
government
that's
has to
exactly
everything.
what I'm saying, that when I personally at the Ministry of Agriculture started this let's support the vulnerable group, I was looking at supporting a group for about 2 years. You go to a household, you support them for 2 to 3 years. The first year is subsistence. The second year, you expand the program. If you start with 2 hectares, 1 hectare of maize, 1 hectare of a seed crop, and you will see that what they generate, they will sell some and they will eat some. In the second year, if you tell people that we are supporting you for 3 years, the 4th year you are going to be thrown to the commercial sector, you see that there will be market change. Look,
but do you see
there are
now
phenomenal
that
things
a lot of
happening
Zambians don't
in
want to move on. They would rather keep on receiving the visit.
I think we have to put a stop to it at some point. There is a lot of interest in the villages. For example, in Mbala district, we supported a group of 400 women with the beans seed crop. We went back there. We still found the beans. They had kept it for us who had taken the money there. The other people who are not on our list, they had sold. And luckily, the chiefs in Mbala sent word in the villages that no one should sell beans for less than 50 kwacha a meda. Look, if we can have chiefs like that who also get involved in development, I think we can get something somewhere. So we need government to work with the local people through decentralization, work with the councillors, MPs, chiefs, to be able to select viable households that can be moved from subsistence to the commercial sector. The other thing which we need to do as a matter of agency, we need to realize that copper is no longer our mainstay. It's in private hands, as the discussion we started going. What is our mainstay? It's agriculture. So how beyond the DRC do we get to the Interlacustrine Kingdom, in between the lakes? We have a gateway that is Lake Tanganyika. We need, as a matter of agency, to sit at the table and develop Mpulungu Port. It can no longer be a discussion of us going to see how Mpulungu Port is there. We need to have ocean-going vessels to transfer goods from Zambia to Burundi to those areas where food is needed. We have a market in Angola, Burundi, and all those countries by the lake shores. And these are some of the orientations that we need to undertake.
Are these discussions that you as politicians need to start having?
Certainly, instead
are
of
politicians ready for change?
No.
We're getting into hot season. I know there'll be a lot of accusations, finger pointing,
I think for me, the last campaign which we did in 2016, I was very proud of that. Even in 2015, I tried to stay away from politics. So I'm begging my friends, please, let us sit and cross-pollinate our ideas. It doesn't matter whether it's President Lungu in office, is Edith Nawakwi in office, is Hakainde in office. Whoever is there, the people who will benefit from our leadership are the people of Zambia. And if we sit, all of us, regardless of our orientation or background, I always say that every human being has their worth. And I say, and I want to emphasize that you see the wealth of a God when it's raining and you've been saying, you God, you are not a good person. That day, it starts to rain and your God says, I'll fix my boss. And the God knows that you didn't take your umbrella. You get to your gate and you have to get out of your nice car and open the gate. That's when you see that every human being
has something to add to life.
To life.
What is your future looking like?
So let us embrace each other in a spirit of this is my brother, this is my sister. Not in a spirit of let me bring this one down so that I rise. If you dig holes for your friends, you may end up falling into them.
What does your future look like politically? I know you haven't been participating in the by-elections.
I have not been participating in the by-election.
Are you going into an alliance?
Which alliance? I have not been participating into by-elections because we agreed at the beginning of, after 2016, that by-elections are a drain on the treasury. All of us are on the same page on that. And we were looking forward to the amendment of a constitution that will get rid of by-elections. We have a running mate for vice president. We could actually have proportional representation where we can actually get rid of by-elections. Now, I don't know, as Zambians, we need to agree. If Mr. Zulu, you are the originator of the idea, then it's not good enough. It must be Edith Nawakwi only. What is good? Right now, you were asking us to, why am I the only one in the arena? The House of Parliament in our country can never even get to 30% if we don't change the constitution, because first past the post is the most cruel, the most costly, the most expensive system of trying to pass the post. And we, the women of Zambia, we not a single committee of the transaction advisors was headed by a woman. Are you telling me there were no women accountants at the time? The whole economic system in our country is skewed against my sisters and mothers. So how do we change that? We need to look up to the Constitution to be able to provide for women leadership. And these are the arguments that you hear whether it's from which quarters. No, butane is bad, the sponsors are evil, what? Look, some of us are just looking for a window for our mothers to be able to have a seat at the table of how resources must be shared for our country. And if we can put power in the hands of women, I can assure you, and I'm not talking that power is only power when it's you are president or vice president. I'm talking about power in the households. When we go in the villages, what we found out in my area, because we are highly patriarchal there, the women are, you know, by tradition, supposed to be submissive. We found out that cooperatives where we said, come with your wife, come with your son, they are doing much, much better.
Unlike those that where men came alone. Well,
yes,
Nawakwi,
I mean,
need to cut you
when they get the money, you know how it's spent. But when women have the money, they'll spend it on the children's education, they'll spend it on the home. So I think the point I'm making is that power is not just about political power. We need economic power to be in the hands of our mothers.
Ms. Nawakwi, it's been a pleasure having you on the program.
No, thank you very much for having me.
You've been watching Sunday Interview, and our guest today was the Forum for Democracy and Development President, Ms. Edith Nawakwi. I'll be back next week, same time. Pleasant viewing.